Hello everyone! It's yet another day in the Clown Decade, and this time we're talking about something that is literally only news because the BBC desperately are pushing this particular sport. As those of you know who look at any mainstream news or media, you will know that the UEFA Women's Football Championships is on at the moment, as it seems to be feminism's biggest push for equality ever, trying to get the viewing numbers up to the same as the men's championships, and to try and push for women to be paid the same as men despite the fact they're in a completely different league, bring in way less viewing figures, and overall just aren't as entertaining as the men's football. But nevertheless, the BBC and other mainstream media sites are constantly pushing for people to watch it and learn about the latest scores, which a lot of people have been noticing. I know a lot of normies who constantly mention it, because all it is a conduit for feminism to try and push its agenda. Oh, we're completely equal to men, therefore we deserve the same as men. Even though if the women were paid the same as men, the Women's Football League would go under within the year. Unless we do what Norway did and siphon off the men's pay to go to the women's, in which case that is literally just stealing. But anyway, why am I talking about women's football like the BBC want me to? Well, it's to point out that all this is for is a conduit for all sorts of politics that I hate. The biggest, most recent example coming after England won 8-0 against Norway at the end of the group stages for the UEFA Women's Championships. The funniest thing being that the Norwegian team are paid the same as the men's Norwegian team, and therefore probably make more money than the English athletes, despite the fact that the English football team are clearly better. But that's just besides the point. Why am I specifically bringing up this particular game? Well, it's because a particular BBC presenter called Ailey Barber decided that it was appropriate to pull a Jon Snow. For those of you who need reminding of that reference,
it has been the most extraordinary day. A day which has seen, I've never seen so many white people in one place. It's an extraordinary story. There are people everywhere. There are crowds everywhere.
Yes, that was Jon Snow reporting on a Brexit protest during Theresa May's premiership, I believe. And he thought it appropriate to basically say, oh, this isn't a very diverse group, they're actually all racist, because that's the implication there. And so this is what Ailey Barber said about the women's football team.
An historic 8-goal victory for England last night as the Lionesses secured their place in the quarter-finals. But all starting 11 players and the 5 substitutes that came onto the pitch were all white. And that does point towards a lack of diversity in the women's game in England. And it's something that Alex Scott has been investigating.
Yes, it's unfortunate, but it appears that the English football team, England being quite full of white people, is predominantly white, and all players that played that day happen to be white. Well, that's really shouldn't be that unusual for a country that is mostly white, but it's something that needs to be pointed out. Like every time the BBC, or Channel 4 in Jon Snow's case, looks at any crowd or looks at anything and it doesn't have enough non-white people in, you've basically got to imply that that's due to racism. And if that's all that happened, I wouldn't be making a video on it, but it appears that a lot of the mainstream media need to constantly shove it in our face that England is white and that's a bad thing. Or at least majority white and that's a bad thing. Because The Guardian came out with an article, and the title of it now is "Lack of Diversity in England Women's Squad Will Stop Many Girls from Dreaming. Setup of elite women's football in England needs to change, and saying so is not a criticism of the squad or the manager, though you are just implying that the whole selection process is racist." And yes, I did say that is the title now, because thanks to the Wayback Machine we can find the old title, which is that whiteness of England's women's squad is stopping too many girls from dreaming. So what The Guardian are implying with this title change is that a lack of diversity and whiteness are just synonyms. They mean the same thing. Basically, they've just said the quiet part out loud that the right wing have been saying for years, that whiteness literally just means not white. And The Guardian has of course been pushing that narrative for some time. I know. I read them every 2 weeks. So the article starts, "Football is about creating dreams, but even the most ambitious and imaginative young players require some initial inspiration." If that's the case, how did any black footballer get into the England squad? There were no white people in the England squad when we won the World Cup in 1966. And then fast forward 50 years later, and now most of the squad, or at least a large minority of the squad, are non-white. And also, football isn't about creating dreams, it's about getting a ball in the back of a net. It's a thing that leftists always do. They always look at the top 1% or something and think that that represents the sport as an entirety, or that particular industry as an entirety. When really 99% of people playing or watching football are literally just trying to entertain themselves. It's really not that deep. Before they can begin envisaging being a part of a trophy-winning team or start dreaming about scoring goals galore, budding lionesses need role models to whom they can relate. Well, luckily they've got a whole squad they can relate to. If they need them to be black to relate to them, then that's a them problem. That is one of many reasons why diversity is so important and why it is legitimate to question the England team's whiteness. Doing so should not be seen as criticism of a very good side or a very good manager in Sarina Wiegman, but an acknowledgement that visibility matters. Young girls who cannot see anyone who looks like they do lack heroines to emulate, and that matters. Just take me back to the 90s, man. Just take me back to the time where race literally didn't matter, where we were basically at the end game of racism. Because as Douglas Murray said the other day, it's just courtesy. If you're going to be this obsessed with race and say these things about a squad that's majority white, why the hell wouldn't people who are going to be punished for the colour of their skin fight back? Like England, France has reached the quarter-final of Euro 2022, but unlike the Lionesses, their 23-woman squad contains 15 black or brown players. By contrast, the Lionesses have only 3 black players, Jess Carter, Nikita Paris and Demi Stokes, with only Carter having so far any game time. Just for some quick maths, 3 people being non-white in a 23-woman squad is about 13% of that squad being non-white. Just to make it clear to all of you, about 15% of the UK is non-white. On a very technical level, that is a slight underrepresentation, but if you replace one of the white women with a black woman, let's say, that will make 4 out of 23 women, that will raise it to 17%, and then they will be overrepresented in terms of the demographics of England. In short, it actually basically, as close as possible, represents Britain's demographics, and that's still a problem. I do find it amazing how leftists will constantly go on about things like the Great Replacement to conspiracy theories, and don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a deliberate act by anyone, I think it's just something that's being sleptwalked into. But when that happens and then you have open calls for demographic replacement in things that are perfectly representative of the demographics of the country, you have to wonder, are they actually being fair? Should we be courteous and give them benefit of the doubt? Or are they actively trying to be malicious at this point? There is clearly a problem, but it has nothing to do with Wiegman's Euro 2022 team sheets and everything to do with pathways leading players to the England squad. And this is why I like going through it. Okay, let's see your actual argument then, because you might not be being malicious, you might just be being an idiot. The English female scouting system lacks sufficient bodies on the ground, the necessary resources and the imagination required to look in the right places. Why don't Chief Scouts ask organisations like Charity Football Beyond Borders to help them identify gifted young players from non-conventional backgrounds? Well, I don't know if they do or don't do that at the moment. Going off your implications, it looks like they don't, but given how Guardian writers basically don't do their due diligence, I have no idea if that's true or not. I'm basing it off the implication there, but they might already do that. But it's not my job to find out, and it's not my job to take implications like that. They need to be much clearer whether they do that or not. However, the start of the next sentence makes me want to cry. Demographics also come into things. Some areas, the northeast for example, are much whiter than others. Even so, scouts do not seem to be identifying promising young black players in much more diverse regions. Are they not looking in the right places? Do laziness or groupthink draw them to search in similar places? Or is it also partly about the WSL's, the Women's Super League's establishment in 2010? Again, it's nothing actually hard-hitting, it's just, oh, I'm going to speculate a load of stuff, I have no idea if it's anything to do with any of that. But she is implying that it is unconscious racism that has caused this. That is what this whole article's about. When I started playing back in the days when women's game was still amateur, the London women's team, Arsenal, Chelsea, Charlton and Fulham, were quite diverse. Yes, that is more than likely because it's in London, and half of London isn't white. So obviously in more diverse places you're going to see more diverse teams. But as you mentioned, these scouts are probably looking all over England rather than just in London. Perhaps strangely, that has changed since 2010. Most England internationals now represent professional and largely white Women's Super League teams. This was something that really struck me when I joined newly promoted Aston Villa in 2020 and realised that with players like me, Jamaica's Shania Haley's, and Aylisha Nadal, we were the WSL's most diverse side. Again, that is because you are in a London team, and with the Women's League, they look for more local people rather than the men's side of things, where they look internationally. What it basically sounds like is that this woman is jealous that she is not on the team, and I think she's actually trying to imply that she's not on the team because the scouts aren't looking for her, and they're not looking for her because she's black, despite the fact that, as mentioned before, the women's English team actually represent England's demographics. Part of the problem stems from the WSL teams having moved mainly to leaf-in-use suburban or semi-rural training facilities away from cities in places like Surrey, Hertfordshire and Cheshire. But that's what the men have done as well. Anyway, I'd love to see how this is the problem. This is the norm for many of their parent men's Premier League clubs who perhaps understandably believe women's teams should train in the same type of places. Well, there you go, some equality. What they may not have thought out is that there's an awful lot less money in the women's game, and many young black girls who often live in inner cities can struggle to reach out to out-of-town training grounds. Again, you're saying this like there aren't poor white girls as well. It's such a trope that comes straight from America. We're a different country, and yes, we do have the same terminology of inner cities, but they are not on the same racial grounds that they are over in America. Whereas a leading men's club might arrange for a male academy player to be transported from school to training and then back home, that option almost certainly won't be there for girls whose parents are unable to ferry her back and forth. Young Premier League players are sometimes housed with host families able to create the right home environment to maximise their talents, but again, this does not happen with their WSL counterparts. Again, with her language, it sounds like she doesn't actually know anything and she's just speculating, which explains why she's writing for The Guardian here. But she's also basically complaining that, oh my god, they're treating us like men, they're putting us in similar facilities to the men. But then, oh no, that's an issue because of this speculation that I have no idea about. This is basically just The Guardian allowing for a column from some black football player who wants to air a grievance about something that she clearly has no idea about. Because this whole language is just an awful lot of maybes. I think they do this. I don't think black girls will be able to be ferried to the training ground and back. I don't think the women's team scouts go to these places. She doesn't actually know any of this. So there's just a waste of time and just an excuse for her to air a grievance and say, I don't think I'm on the women's team because I'm black. That's basically what she's saying here. While no group is homogenous, and it is wrong to buy into the received wisdom that all young black players are disadvantaged and live in inner cities, okay, fair enough. Clearly a sweeping generalisation, the suburbanisation of training facilities has evidently limited opportunities for both black and white girls from working class backgrounds. Okay, at least you mentioned that then. By way of further complication, some schools have been very slow to introduce football as an option for girls. Probably because they've already got enough facilities with hockey and rounders, but there we go. Another problem is the lack of black and brown faces on coaching staffs. I played for quite a few clubs over the years, but my former England manager, Hope Powell, apart, I never worked with a non-white coach. That needs to change. This, by the way, is part of the reason I think this is just a pathetic grievance piece to say I should be on the women's team because I'm black, because she literally won't drop the subject. And she originally titled this, or I suppose the editor titled this, Whiteness is the Issue. I'm sorry, but when I'm seeing a lot of racist language, I'm going to assume that she's just a racist. Some young black players are probably discouraged by the events of 2017 when the FA eventually apologised to Eni Aluko after her claims that England's former manager Mark Sampson had directed racist comments towards her. When they saw Eni wasn't believed at first, they maybe thought, why risk putting myself through that? Again, language, another maybe. She has no idea. Though at least with that speculation, there seems to be a lot more backing to it than anything else she's said so far, even if it isn't much. Then there is the lack of understanding about cultural barriers in some black, Asian and minority communities, where there are often a lot of different pressures for girls to conform to their gender norms. For instance, when British cycling began encouraging people from the Southeast Asian community to take up cycling, it did not initially realise that, in that culture, cycling was synonymous with poor people and consequently looked down on. Once officials explained why cycling in England is regarded as very differently, a positive response followed. Yeah, but with football in England, there is absolutely no way that immigrants or anyone in any other culture doesn't know how large a status symbol it is to be a footballer. So I am not buying that. In football too, coaches and administrators can sometimes be a bit lazy about understanding the cultural differences which would enable them to challenge perceptions and sometimes myths. It's never asked, but why would an English football team care about any culture other than the English culture. It's a national team from England. Why do outside perspectives matter? Why do they need to challenge perceptions? Why can't they just get the best English footballers there are? And you haven't given any advice on what they can do better. You're just saying maybe they can do some things. I'm not sure if they actually do them or not. Like, what a pointless article. But visibility or lack of it remains the biggest problem. I was doing some punditry for the BBC last week when the presenter, Ailey Barbour, initiated a discussion about the Lionesses' lack of diversity. The Twitter backlash, with many users assuming wrongly we were criticising Weigmann's England, suggested too many people are in denial about our diversity problem. They don't realise everybody needs to be able to dream. Yeah, well, the fact you're directly referring to that clip and saying, yeah, people are just misunderstanding it, here's what we really meant, and then you write this article, yeah, no, we know exactly what they really meant. It can never just be the case that, oh, you're seeing a lot of white people about because you're in England and it's predominantly white. It's never just the end of the conversation there. Oh, but what about black people? They might not feel like they can get into places if they're seeing so many white people. Well, I'm not being funny, but you're clearly one of the first black women footballers, or you're talking like you're the only one. What the hell made you want to go into it? Oh, I enjoyed football. Yeah, guess what? Anyone who enjoys football is going to play football, and then if they're good enough, rise up in the ranks. This is clearly just airing a grievance trying to use the current political paradigm, and it's disgusting. And as if it couldn't get any worse, Ailey Barbour decided to tweet, I'm glad this conversation is happening. Football is a game for all. It has never been about criticising the England team. It's about looking to the future and the pathways so that girls can have the same opportunities to be a lioness. Yeah, I'm not being funny. If this was set up in 2010, they absolutely always had the opportunity to be a lioness. It's not like this is an institution that has lasted since the times that the leftists think everyone was racist. No, this came about in 2010. Like, right from the bat, we pretty much had equal opportunity for Women's Super League. And as was mentioned in the article, where you see more black women, you see more black women in the teams. Almost as if the opportunity was equal. Or at the very least, there was clearly no discrimination based on race. Anyway, if all that wasn't bad enough, we also need white saviours such as Charlotte Harper, who wrote for The Athletic UK, they don't look like me, it's off-putting. England, women and the lack of non-white role models. I watch and support England, but for me, the French team, I love it. It's beautiful. This is what football should look like. Why are France able to get it right, but we're struggling when we're such a diverse country? Such a weird way to look at the world. Why should football teams look like anything? It's so weird. It's like France is great. It's got more black people than the English team. Okay, cool. What about Nigeria? What about other African teams where they're entirely black? Is that good? Or does that have the same issue as the white English team? I can't imagine you'd say it does. I'm supporting England, but who can I say I relate to or look like? That can be off-putting. What an insane way to look at the world. Hannah Baptiste, a former England under-16s youth international who now plays senior football for Guyana, is not the only one to feel disconnected when watching the England women's team in the Euro 2022. Okay, come on, I need to find even more out about why having a predominantly white English team is a bad thing. It's a bit disheartening. Visibility is important, says Aminata Lewis from Newham. The 18-year-old, a huge fan of France striker Marie-Antoinette Katoto, has recently got a scholarship to play college football in America, having been part of West Ham United's development team. Cool, good for her. That's why I look up to other teams like France and Paris Saint-Germain, because they have that diversity. If you see someone that looks like you, you believe that you can do it yourself. It's like they're implying, a lot of the time they are actually implying this, they don't feel fully English. And then it just begs the question, why is it when you have lived in England for this long you cannot relate to English women playing football? Why can't they be your role models? Why is race so important to you? It's an important question to ask, because it clearly doesn't affect all black women everywhere, because some black women are on the football team, and as we saw in the previous article, black women are clearly joining football teams in the United Kingdom and England. So what is the worldview of this 18-year-old where she prefers other countries just because there are more people that look like her? I do wonder what has got that in her mind, or how that idea developed in her mind. Because I just can't imagine seeing a predominantly black area of whatever, anything I love, and saying I can't be part of that because I don't see enough white people there. I just can't ever imagine thinking that. And that's not the end of it. Ikra Ismail the first captain of the Somalia women's national team, also feels torn when watching a team who in the past provided black role models in Rachel Yankee, Anita Asante and Inai Aluku. It is different to feel fully immersed in a team you feel doesn't represent you, she says. I still support England. I want them to win the Euros. I still want them to come home. And then you've just got to... That also begs the question, why as a Somali are you wondering why the English team doesn't represent you? It's a simple question. I don't know why you'd expect the English team would represent you, and yet... Like, is the Somali team supposed to represent me? Is that what we're saying here? It's all one way. As Douglas Murray says, courtesy. It can't just be one way. What you give out, we're going to have to give back. Because it's not going to work in a one-way street. I mean, my God, they're even bringing kids into this. So when a black, mixed heritage or Asian girl switches on the TV to watch England at the Summer's European Championships, she may not see anyone relatable. This has already happened. Nutmegs, a football community for women and non-binary people of colour, pass on tickets to those who have not been to a live game before. At the 2021 Women's FA Cup final, a 7-year-old Muslim girl of South Asian heritage couldn't wait to attend Wembley for the first time. She was super excited because she plays football at school but is the only girl, says Hayley Burnett, the co-founder of Nutmegs and a diversity and inclusion consultant. I was hoping it would be really affirming for her to see... That is an important thing to point out, actually. She is a diversity and inclusion consultant. So I hope it would be really affirming for her to see women's football being played in the stadium, as she wasn't aware it existed. But this girl didn't see anyone who looked like her on the pitch and a few in the stands. It sent the opposite message, and she commented on the fact that the players she saw were not the same as her, which just reinforced all the negative messages she had absorbed that football wasn't for girls like her, says Bennett. It was the worst thing we could have done to inspire her professionally. I don't believe you. I don't believe a girl got that excited about football, realised that was professional football, and then saw that there were, it was just a crowd of white people basically, and then thought, oh, that can't possibly be for me, unless you implanted the idea there. I'm sorry, but by this logic, absolutely no non-white women should be in the leagues at all. And yet, as mentioned, plenty of football teams are diverse in London. You can't have your cake and eat it here. This is all just speculation, and it's all just an excuse to, quite frankly, be racist against white people yet again. And then even more stories about kids, they just don't sound believable. Goalkeeper Chanel Salgado, born and raised in Germany to parents from Sri Lanka and Portugal, is one of 3 Asian players in the Women's Championship. Last season, when Lewis played at Liverpool, she went over to sign some autographs and caught the attention of an Asian family. The mum had a little girl with her, and she said, "Look, look," and the girl said, "Oh mum, she looks like me," says Salgado. That hit me. I thought, wow, I've never had someone to look up to. Wow, and you still went into professional football. Wow, my God. It's like you don't need these role models. It's like, as I say, it's just an excuse to have a go that there's a lot of white people. Even though clearly, because apparently you had no choice, you could only be inspired by white people. It's all complete self-interest. It's all just a complete excuse for these people to have more secure jobs, because there'll be less competition because of the colour of their skin, and they can more relax in their jobs. Whereas if you're just going to try and push white people out, which that's the quiet part behind all these articles. They're quite literally saying white people need to be replaced so that, let me just check my notes. So that young girls can have role models. And then these same women didn't have these role models and still went in. So their logic falls apart, and yet people follow on this crap. For example, of Sky News report, Serena Wiegman, England women head coach, hopeful team will be more racially diverse in the future. And then they have to go on again. Just 3 of the 23 members of the Euro 2022 squad are from black, Asian or mixed heritage backgrounds. That is representative. Serena Wiegman hopes that the England team will be more racially diverse in the longer term. Former Lionesses defender Anita Asante believes that the pathway into elite women's game has to be reformed to achieve greater diversity, with just 3 of the 23 members of Wiegman's Euro 20... We've heard that. England's group opener against Austria marked a watershed moment for the women's game, with a predominantly young female crowd of almost 69,000 packed into Old Trafford, home of Man United, once again having to use things built and funded for by men, highlighting the strides the women's game has made in England in recent years. But there was also something else noticeable to a lot of people in England and beyond, especially once it had been shared across social media. England fielded an all-white starting 11 against Austria. I love it. So did Austria. In fact, out of the entire Austrian squad, there isn't a single black woman. Why is it only England that gets to be demoralised? Why... none of them have put that caveat in. Actually, France seems to be the odd one out. France seems to be the one with a lot of black players in their squad, and the rest of Europe seems to be pretty representative of their own country's demographics. And therefore France is the best football team because they have the most black players. It's such a backward way of thinking. And this is where it's come to a head, because women's football in England is literally nothing but a way to push these woke politics, basically. And the reason they can do that is because absolutely no one cares. I mean, alright, fair enough, England did fill up Old Trafford to 69,000 people. But man, you compare that to the amount of people that are watching it, it's just, compared to the men's as well, it's just ridiculous. Old Trafford should be selling out for every game played there. 69,000 is not a sellout stadium. And this was the thing with men's football. There was quite a bit of pushback to the players kneeling, but eventually everyone just stopped caring because it started to become meaningless. You had someone flying a banner over Bolton saying White Lives Matter because of the kneeling. You had quite a bit of pushback, but with the women's football, as I say, absolutely no one cares. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because no one cares, they're just going to keep pushing along with this, and I don't think that's a sensible thing to do. And I think, in fact, all it's going to do is sow resentment and push further problems, which I think will eventually spill outside of women's football. But it's something to keep an eye on. This won't be the last we hear about the lack of diversity in England's football squad, which of course just means there are too many white people. It's a pathetic worldview, it is nothing but malice. Quite frankly, the best case scenario is the people pushing for this sort of thing are just ejected from anything to do with women's football. But that's not going to happen, so expect things to get worse. But that's everything I had for you today, so, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.